Thank you so much for joining me for today's story. I'm absolutely thrilled to share that we just hit 6,000 subscribers. What an incredible milestone. I'm truly grateful for each and every one of you who has joined our community. And now we're on an exciting journey toward 10,000 subscribers, with only 4,000 to go. If you enjoyed this tale and you're new here, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing. Your support means everything to me. Now let's dive in to today's story. Space rescue operations aren't for the faint of heart. 15 years of service has taught me that much, but nothing, not the Titan mining disaster of '82, not the Europa station collapse, not even the horrific Ganymede incident, could have prepared me for what we found on colony NX-317. My name is Captain Thomas Reynolds. I command the deep space rescue vessel Odyssey, and this is my account of what happened on that godforsaken rock at the edge of known space. I'm recording this now because people need to know the truth. They need to understand what's out there, waiting in the darkness between the stars. The call came in on a Friday morning. I remember because I was about to start my weekend leave when Commander Yuki's face appeared on my terminal. Her expression told me everything I needed to know before she even spoke. Reynolds, we've got a situation. Colony NX-317 has gone dark. I knew about NX-317. Everyone in Deep Space Ops did. It was our farthest colony, set up 3 years ago to mine xanthium, a rare mineral that powers our newest generation of quantum drives. 300 colonists, state-of-the-art facilities, and enough automated systems to run a small city. The colony had been sending regular reports every 48 hours since its establishment, until now. How long? I asked, already pulling up the colony's specs on my datapad. 6 days. No distress signal, no automated broadcasts, nothing. It's like someone just flipped a switch. I've seen colonies go dark before. Usually it's a communications malfunction or power failure. Sometimes it's worse, micrometeorite strikes, pressure hull breaches, or environmental system failures. But something about this felt different. A colony that size had redundancies built upon redundancies. For everything to go silent at once. I'm assembling a team, I told her. We'll need... Already done, she interrupted, sending me a roster. Your best people, plus some specialists I'm bringing in. Dr. Isabella Romano, xenobiologist, top of her field. James Phillips, systems engineer, worked on the original colony construction. And Lieutenant David Jackson, colonial security forces trained in hostile environment operations. I scanned through their profiles. The rest of the team would be my regular crew. Dr. Michael Way, our medical officer, Anna Petrova, communications specialist, Marcus Wong, environmental systems expert, and Kate O'Brien, our pilot. 8 of us in total. It should have been enough. God, we were so naive. The Odyssey broke orbit 6 hours later. The journey to NX-317 would take 13 days, even with our newest engines pushing at maximum capacity. During that time, I studied everything we had on the colony. Construction logs, maintenance reports, crew rotations, geological surveys, anything that might give us a clue about what we were walking into. The planet itself was unremarkable, a rocky world orbiting twin stars, locked in eternal twilight. Its atmosphere was breathable with support, gravity at 1.1 Earth standard. The colony was built into the side of a mountain range, using natural caverns expanded by mining operations. Perfect for xanthium extraction, they said. Perfect for isolation, I thought. On day 12 of our journey, Dr. Romano called me to the observation deck. She'd been analysing long-range scans of the colony. Look at this, she said, pointing to a complex series of readings. The colony's power grid is still active, not just active. It's running at 127% of normal capacity. That's impossible, Phillips chimed in from behind us. The reactors have built-in limiters. They can't exceed 110%, even in emergency situations. Well, something's drawing a lot of power down there, Romano replied. "And look at these electromagnetic readings. I've never seen patterns like this before." The closer we got, the stranger things became. Our communications array picked up random bursts of static that, when filtered through our computers, almost sounded like whispers. The ship's chronometers started displaying impossible times only to snap back to normal moments later. Small things, easy to dismiss as equipment malfunctions. We should have known better. We achieved orbit around NX 317 at 3:47 PM ship time. The colony sprawled below us, its lights still burning bright against the perpetual dusk. Everything looked normal from up here. Too normal. No signs of damage, no debris fields, no indication of what had silenced 300 people. "Beginning atmospheric entry," O'Brien announced from the pilot's seat. "Weather conditions are unusual." That was an understatement. The ship bucked and shuddered as we descended through layers of storms that hadn't appeared on any of our scans. Lightning danced across the hull, leaving strange, shimmering patterns that lingered too long. The static in our comms grew louder, organizing itself into something that almost sounded like words. Through gaps in the clouds, we caught glimpses of the colony. The landing pad lights pulsed in perfect sequence, guiding us down. Vehicles sat parked in neat rows outside the main complex. A massive cargo hauler stood frozen in the middle of the loading zone, its crane still holding a container aloft. "This doesn't make sense," Jackson muttered, checking his weapons for the third time. "If there was an evacuation, why is everything still running? If there wasn't, where is everyone?" We touched down at 4:23 PM local time. The storm raged around us, but the landing pad's force field held it at bay, creating an eerie bubble of calm. Through the viewports, we could see the colony's main entrance, a massive airlock set into the mountainside, emblazoned with the NX 317 logo and the slogan, "Forging Humanity's Future." As we prepared for egress, Dr. Way approached me with his preliminary atmospheric readings. Air is breathable with minimal filtration, but there's something else. Some kind of particulate matter I can't identify. It's organic, but it's not showing up in any of our databases. I made the call to proceed with full environmental suits anyway, standard protocol for unknown situations. We didn't know it then, but that decision bought us a few precious hours before everything went to hell. The airlock cycled open at our approach, responding to our emergency override codes. The sound it made, a long, low hiss followed by a series of clicks, echoed off the surrounding mountains. It felt like the whole planet was holding its breath, waiting to see what we would do next. "Reynolds to Odyssey," I transmitted. "Beginning initial survey. Maintain orbit and keep channels open." Static answered me, punctuated by what sounded like laughter, distant and distorted but unmistakably human. When I looked at my team, I could see in their eyes that they'd heard it too. We stepped through the airlock, our boots clicking against the metal floor. Emergency lights cast alternating patterns of shadow and illumination down the main corridor. The air felt thick, heavy with more than just the artificial atmosphere. There was something else here, something watching, waiting. We were about to discover exactly what had silenced Colony NX 317. And nothing, not our training, not our technology, not our human understanding of the universe, could have prepared us for the truth. The main corridor stretched before us like the throat of some massive beast. Our helmet lights cut through the gloom, revealing walls lined with status displays still flickering with activity. The air recyclers hummed. Maintenance drones whirred past on their programmed routes, and somewhere deep in the complex we could hear the low throb of the colony's reactors. "Everything's still running," Phillips muttered, his voice tight with tension as he checked a nearby console. "Environmental systems, power distribution, even the automated maintenance schedules. It's like everyone just vanished." Dr. Romano stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. Listen. We froze. Through our suit radios came a sound that made my skin crawl, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on metal. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Atmospheric vibrations, she said, but she didn't sound convinced. Has to be. The colony's main hub opened before us, a vast circular chamber stretching up at least 6 levels. Walkways and bridges crisscrossed the open space, connecting different sections. Hydroponics, medical, residential blocks, research labs. The place should have been bustling with activity. Instead, we found ourselves in a cathedral of silence. Check the security station, I ordered, pointing to a reinforced booth near the center of the hub. There has to be footage. Jackson and Petrova moved toward the security station while the rest of us spread out to secure the immediate area. That's when we found the first sign that something was truly wrong. "Captain," Dr. Way called out, his voice shaking. "You need to see this." He stood in front of the colony's main cafeteria. The doors were open, revealing a scene that defied explanation. Dozens of meals sat on tables, some with forks still poised over plates. Chairs pushed back at odd angles. Steam still rose from cups of coffee. A child's colouring book lay open, crayon marks trailing off the page in a jagged line. "This isn't possible," Romano whispered, checking the timestamp on a nearby food synthesizer. "These meals were prepared 6 days ago. They should be." She trailed off, running her scanner over a plate of what looked like scrambled eggs. "They're fresh, not just warm. They were made within the last hour." Before I could process that impossibility, Jackson's voice crackled over our comms. "Captain, we've got access to the security feeds, but there's something wrong with them." We regrouped at the security station. The displays showed every corner of the colony in crystal clear detail. Empty corridors, abandoned workstations, deserted living quarters. But there was movement. Quick flickers at the edge of frames, shadows that shouldn't exist in fully lit rooms. "Look at this," Jackson said, pulling up footage from 6 days ago. The last day of normal operations. The footage started normally enough. Colonists going about their daily routines. Children playing in designated recreation areas. Scientists working in their labs. Then, at exactly 3:17 p.m. local time, everyone stopped. 300 people, frozen in place for precisely 12 seconds. When they moved again, something had changed. We watched as colonists began abandoning their posts, their movements becoming increasingly erratic. Parents left their children unattended. Scientists walked away from critical experiments. Security personnel ignored alerts flashing across their screens. "Where are they going?" O'Brien asked, leaning closer to the screens. The footage showed them converging on the lower levels, disappearing into maintenance tunnels and access corridors. Some walked purposefully, others stumbled as if drugged. The final images showed the colony's head of operations, Dr. Helen Morrison, recording a message in her office. "Play it," I ordered. The footage was crystal clear, but the audio was distorted, filled with a strange subsonic hum that made my teeth ache. Dr. Morrison looked directly into the camera, her eyes wide and unfocused. "They're in the walls," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We thought we found it, but it found us first. The whispers. They're getting louder. It's awake now. It's so beautiful. So perfect. Such angles in its mind." She laughed, the sound high and brittle. "Can't you hear it calling? Down in the dark, where the dreams live, where all angles lead to one point. We're going to be part of it. All of us. Forever." The recording ended with her standing up, walking calmly to her office wall and pressing her hand against it. The metal seemed to ripple under her touch, but before we could see what happened next, the footage dissolved into static. "What happened next?" I demanded. "Show me the rest." Jackson's fingers flew over the controls. "That's it. All footage after this point is corrupted. Not deleted, corrupted. Like something deliberately scrambled the data. A sudden bang echoed through the hub, making us all jump. One of the maintenance drones had collapsed, its servos whining as it tried to right itself. But what caught my attention was what the drone had been doing before it failed. It had been writing something on the wall over and over, using its cleaning fluid to draw the same pattern, a series of intersecting lines that hurt my eyes to look at. Those symbols, Romano breathed, pulling up images on her datapad. They matched the ones we saw in the long-range scans. The electromagnetic patterns, they're the same design. The humming from the reactors grew louder, and with it came that sound again. The tapping, but this time accompanied by something else. Something that sounded almost like singing. "We need to get to the lower levels," I said, trying to ignore the way the shadows seemed to be deepening around us. "Whatever happened here started down there." "Captain," Way interjected, his medical scanner beeping urgently, "those organic particles I detected, they're concentrated in the air circulation system, and they're multiplying." I made a decision. "Phillips, Romano, you're with me. We're heading down to check the main research lab. Way O'Brien, secure this level and establish a base of operations. Jackson, Petrova, Wong, check the residential blocks. I want to know where everyone went." As we split up, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Not by cameras or sensors, but by something else, something that had been waiting for us. Something that was finally awake. The descent to the lower levels felt like entering another world entirely. Emergency lighting cast everything in a blood-red glow, and the walls seemed to sweat with condensation that shouldn't have been possible in a climate-controlled environment. Our footsteps echoed strangely, as if the metal floors were hollow beneath us. Phillips consulted his tablet, which displayed a schematic of the colony's layout. Main research complex should be through here. They were studying the xanthium deposits, trying to understand why this planet had such high concentrations of... He stopped abruptly, frowning at his screen. "That's not right." "What is it?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "These schematics. They're changing. Look." He held up the tablet, and we watched as new corridors and rooms appeared on the map, spreading like veins through the existing structure. "This is impossible. These sections don't exist. They can't exist. The mountain isn't big enough to..." A scream cut through our comms. High, terrified, and unmistakably human. It was Petrova. "Anyone near residential?" I barked into the comm. "Petrova, report!" Jackson's voice came through, breathless and panicked. "We found her radio in Block D, but she's gone. There's something on the walls. Some kind of writing, but it keeps changing when we look at it. And Captain, we found footprints. Hundreds of them, all leading deeper into the block. But they're wrong, the way they're shaped. They're not human anymore." "Hold position," I ordered. "We're coming to..." "No!" Romano interrupted, pointing down the corridor ahead of us. "Look!" A figure stood at the end of the hallway. A colonist, still wearing their standard-issue uniform. They were facing away from us, standing impossibly still. "This is Captain Reynolds of the rescue vessel Odyssey," I called out, keeping my voice steady. "Please identify yourself." The figure's head turned. Not their body, just their head, rotating a full 180 degrees with a wet, grinding sound. What we saw wasn't a face. It was like someone had taken the idea of a face and filtered it through a nightmare. Features shifted and flowed like liquid, eyes appearing and disappearing, mouths opening within mouths. Phillips retched inside his helmet. Romano raised her scanner with trembling hands. "Biological readings are... impossible," she whispered. "It's registering as both organic and inorganic, living and dead, singular and multiple. It's like..." The thing moved. One moment it was at the end of the corridor, the next it was right in front of us. its body twisting in ways that violated every law of physics and biology. A sound came from it, not through our comms, but directly into our minds. A symphony of screaming voices, all begging us to understand. Run! I shoved Phillips and Romano back the way we came. The thing followed, not by walking or running, but by flowing along the walls and ceiling, its form breaking apart and reforming with each movement. We sprinted back towards the main hub, but the corridors had changed. Passages that should have been straight now curved at impossible angles. Doors led to walls, and walls opened into spaces that couldn't exist. "Way!" I shouted into my comm. "Emergency evac protocol. Get everyone back to the ship." Static answered me, broken by fragments of voices. "Can't find the exit. They're in my suit." So beautiful when you understand. The angles are right now. Romano stumbled and I caught her arm. She was staring at her scanner, her face pale behind her faceplate. "Captain, the organic particles, they're not just in the air. They're in our suits. They've been in our suits since we landed. They're..." Her voice cut off as her faceplate cracked, not from external pressure, but from within. Something dark and writhing pushed through the fractures. Her scream turned into a gurgle, and then into that same horrible singing we'd heard before. Phillips ran. I don't blame him. I tried to run too, but my legs wouldn't move. I could only watch as Romano's suit split open like a blooming flower, revealing something that had once been human, but was now a testament to the impossible. I remember falling. The floor beneath me had become soft, pulsing like living tissue. As my vision blurred, I saw them. All of them. The missing colonists, transformed into shapes that defied comprehension, moving through walls that had become permeable, existing in more dimensions than our minds could process. And behind them all, vast and ancient and patient, was something else. Something that had been waiting in the dark between the stars since before our species learned to walk upright. It reached for me with appendages made of thought and matter and possibility, and as consciousness faded, I heard its voice, welcome to the new geometry of flesh. The last thing I saw before blackness took me was Phillips, running down a corridor that turned back on itself like a Mobius strip, screaming as the walls reached out to embrace him. I woke up 3 hours later in a maintenance closet. My suit's oxygen reserves nearly depleted. The comm was filled with screams and that endless, maddening singing. I could hear movement outside, wet, slithering sounds accompanied by the clicking of too many limbs on metal floors. My tablet still worked. As I checked the feeds from our suit cameras, I saw what had happened to the others. O'Brien dissolving into a cloud of geometric patterns that still held the echo of her consciousness. Wong, his body twisting inside out as he laughed and begged for more. Jackson spreading across the walls like a living mural, his eyes multiplying until they covered every surface. They were all still alive, in whatever sense that word could apply now. They had become part of it, part of the thing that had been waiting here. The thing that had called to us across the vastness of space. And somewhere in the darkness I could hear Petrova's voice, sweet and terrible. "Don't be afraid, Captain. The change is so beautiful. Let us show you what we've learned. Let us teach you how to break free from the prison of form." I had to move. Had to think. Had to find a way to stop this before it could spread. Because I understood now, this wasn't just about the colony. This was a beachhead. A foothold for something that wanted to remake all of humanity in its own impossible image. And the worst part of me wanted to let it. The maintenance closet became my sanctuary as I tried to gather my thoughts. My suit's oxygen reading showed 4 hours remaining. 4 hours to either find a way out or join the horror that the colony had become. The walls around me pulsed gently like blood flowing through veins, but I forced myself to ignore it. I had to focus. My tablet still worked, though the screen occasionally rippled with impossible colours. I pulled up the colony's original geological surveys, looking for something, anything, that might explain what they'd found down here. The files were corrupted, text flowing like mercury across the screen, but certain words kept repeating. Cavity, structure, predates, dormant. A message flickered across my comm system. Dr. Way's voice, but wrong, like multiple people speaking in harmony with something that had never been human. Captain, you need to see this. We've found the birth chamber. It's where they first broke through, where they found the dreaming god. It's so beautiful, Captain. The way it folds reality like paper. The way it teaches flesh to ignore its own rules. Please come, please understand. I muted the comm, but the voices continued in my head. Images flashed through my mind. The colony's children, their bodies flowing together like watercolours to form new shapes that giggled with multiple mouths. Scientists merging with their equipment, becoming hybrid beings of flesh and metal that defied all natural law. And through it all, that presence, vast, ancient, and so terribly patient. My hands shook as I checked my suit's integrity. The organic particles Romano had detected were everywhere now, swirling in complex patterns across my faceplate. As I watched, they began to form familiar shapes, the same symbols we'd seen throughout the colony. My breath caught as I realized I could almost read them. A sound from outside made me freeze. Something was moving past my hiding spot. Something big. Through the gap under the door, I saw a mass of writhing shapes that might have once been human limbs, all connected to a central mass that pulsed with its own light. It paused, and I heard Phillips's voice emerge from it. I understand now, Captain, why they built this colony here. It wasn't for the xanthium. The mineral was just a lure, drawing us to this place. To him. He's been waiting so long, dreaming of what we could become. Let me show you. The thing that had been Phillips began to seep under the door, not as liquid or gas, but as something that existed between states of matter. I scrambled back, pressing myself against the far wall, which now felt warm and yielding against my suit. My oxygen alarm chimed softly. 3 hours remaining. I had to move, had to find answers. The research labs would have records, something to explain what they found before everything went wrong. But getting there meant crossing through areas of the colony that no longer obeyed the laws of our reality. I checked my equipment one last time. My plasma cutter still worked. Small mercy. The thought of using it on things that had once been my crew made me sick. But I remembered Romano's transformation. Death might be a kindness compared to what they'd become. The door of my sanctuary began to bubble and distort. It was now or never. I ran. The corridors had become a nightmare gallery. Every surface writhed with transformed colonists, their bodies fused with the walls and ceiling. Eyes watched me from angles that shouldn't exist. Mouths opened in impossible places to sing that maddening song. The floor rippled beneath my feet, trying to grab my boots with pseudopods of living metal. I caught glimpses of familiar faces in the organic murals around me. Wong, his features endlessly duplicating and dissolving. Jackson, his body stretched into geometric patterns that folded through dimensions I couldn't comprehend. They called out as I passed, their voices a chorus of ecstasy and horror. The angles are all wrong in your head, Captain. Let us fix you. Let us make you perfect. Let us show you what's between the spaces of your thoughts. I ran until my lungs burned, trying to follow the map in my head to the research labs. But the colony's layout had become fluid. Corridors twisting back on themselves in Mobius loops. Rooms stacked in ways that violated Euclidean geometry. Gravity shifted unpredictably. One moment I was running on the floor, the next on the walls or ceiling, my sense of up and down becoming meaningless. Then I saw it. The entrance to the main lab, though entrance was hardly the right word anymore. It was more like a wound in reality. its edges peeled back to reveal something that looked less like a laboratory and more like the inside of a living organism. As I approached, my tablet sparked to life, displaying the last research log. The date stamp was corrupted, but the video played with crystal clarity. Dr. Morrison, again, but earlier, before whatever they found had changed her. The xanthium crystals, they're not natural formations. They're more like receivers, or maybe translators. The patterns within them, they're identical to the structure we found in the deep cave system. The entity inside, it's been reaching out, touching our dreams, reshaping our understanding of reality itself. The others think we should seal the chamber, but it's too late. It's already in our heads. God help us, it's already... The screen went dark, then cracked as something pushed through it from within. A tendril of living metal and flesh that tried to wrap around my wrist. I smashed the tablet against the wall and stepped through the threshold into what had once been the research lab. The sight that greeted me defied description. The room had become a cathedral of flesh and geometry, its walls breathing in patterns that hurt my mind to follow. In the centre, suspended in a column of light that bent in impossible ways, hung what remained of Dr. Morrison. She turned to face me, or rather, the 100 faces that now composed her form all turned at once. When she spoke, her voice was a symphony of harmonics that made my teeth vibrate in their sockets. It took us so long to understand, Captain. We thought we were studying it, but it was studying us, learning how our reality worked, so it could teach us how to break free from it. Your crew has already joined us. Why do you resist? Why cling to your limited form when you could be so much more? Behind her, reality itself seemed to tear open, revealing something vast and dark and beautiful. The entity, the dreaming god, the thing that had been waiting here for eons. As I stared into that infinite complexity, I felt my mind begin to crack. The oxygen alarm chimed again, 2 hours left, and in that moment, as my sanity teetered on the edge of an abyss, I realized something terrible. I was beginning to understand the geometry of its thoughts. The thing that had been Dr. Morrison reached for me with appendages that twisted through dimensions I was never meant to perceive. I stumbled backward, my plasma cutter raised in trembling hands. The blade of superheated plasma passed through one of her reaching limbs, and the air filled with a scream that existed in frequencies beyond human hearing. But where I cut her, she didn't bleed. She fractaled, splitting into recursive patterns that folded back into themselves. Each new segment sprouted eyes, mouths, reaching hands that beckoned me closer. "The pain is beautiful," her many voices sang. "Let us show you how to transcend it." I ran deeper into the lab complex, past workstations that had fused with their operators, past sample containers whose contents now moved with terrible purpose. The walls rippled with patterns that my eyes refused to fully process, fractal geometries that suggested movements in directions that shouldn't exist. My oxygen meter chimed. 1 hour, 45 minutes. A door ahead of me burst open, and Petrova stumbled through. For a moment she looked normal, terrified, but human. Then her form shuddered, and I saw the truth beneath the illusion. Her body had become a living kaleidoscope, constantly shifting between states of matter. "Captain," she said, her voice overlapping with itself in impossible echoes. "I found them. I found the original records. You have to see. You have to understand why they chose this place." Before I could react, she grabbed my arm. The sensation sent lightning bolts of wrongness through my nervous system. Images flooded my mind. Not memories, but something else. I saw the colony's construction through multiple sets of eyes, from angles that violated perspective. I saw the miners break through into that ancient chamber. I saw what they found there. It'd been waiting for so long, dreaming in geometries that our universe wasn't built to contain. The first colonist to touch it hadn't screamed. He had laughed, even as his body began to fold through itself. becoming something new and impossible. They didn't understand at first, Petrova's voices explained. They thought it was just another mineral deposit, but it was looking back at them, learning, comprehending, and then teaching. She pulled me towards a terminal that still functioned, though its screen showed impossible colours. Text scrolled across it, but the letters kept rearranging themselves into new meanings. Project Overseer Final Report. Date. Error. Temporal coordinates nonlinear. The entity is not hostile. It is curious. It exists in a framework of reality that makes our understanding of physics look like cave paintings. The xanthium crystals aren't just minerals. They're fragments of its thoughts, crystallized into our reality. Every time we process them for fuel, we're burning pieces of its dreams. It showed us things. Horrible, beautiful things. The true shape of space-time. The mathematics of consciousness. The angles that exist between moments. We thought we were studying it, but we were becoming it. The changes started slowly. Dreams of impossible geometries. New ways of thinking that hurt at first, until our brains learned to fold differently. Then the physical changes began. God help me, I gave the order to contain it, to seal off the lower levels. But you can't contain something that exists in more dimensions than we can perceive. It was already in our heads, teaching us how to transcend our limited forms. To anyone who finds this, don't try to stop it, you can't. It's not evil. It's simply so far beyond our understanding of reality that merely comprehending it changes you. Changes everything. The universe is so much bigger than we imagined, so much more beautiful, and soon everyone will see. The text dissolved into patterns that squirmed across the screen like living things. Petrova's grip on my arm tightened, and I felt my suit begin to soften, to merge with her transformed flesh. "Don't fight it," she whispered with too many mouths. "Let me show you what's on the other side of thought." I tore away from her, leaving part of my suit's sleeve merged with her shifting form. Warning alerts flashed across my helmet display as the suit's integrity was compromised. My oxygen reserves began to drop faster. 1 hour, 30 minutes. A new sound filled the air, a deep, resonant tone that made my bones vibrate. The entity was moving. Through the writhing walls of the lab, I could feel its vast attention turning toward me. "The dreaming god awakens," Petrova sang. "The transformation reaches its final stage. Soon this entire colony will become a doorway. Reality itself will learn how to dream new shapes." The floor beneath me began to dissolve, revealing layers of structure that shouldn't exist. Architecture that followed rules of geometry that predated the Big Bang. And through it all, I could feel that vast intelligence reaching out, trying to teach me how to break free from the prison of three-dimensional space. The worst part was, I was beginning to understand. The numbers and angles in my mind were starting to make a terrible kind of sense. Reality wasn't solid. It was more like a suggestion, a habit that could be broken with the right mathematics. My oxygen meter blinked. 1 hour, 15 minutes. And somewhere in the depths of the colony, something vast and patient and older than stars continued to dream its way into our world, one transformed mind at a time. I had to find a way to stop it. But as I stared into the shifting patterns of what had once been my friend, I wasn't sure if there was enough of my humanity left to try. The colony's reactor core pulsed like a living heart. Its containment chamber transformed into something that belonged in a madman's fever dream. The walls had become transparent in places, showing not the mountain rock beyond, but impossible spaces that stretched into infinity. My boots stuck slightly with each step, the metal floor having taken on the consistency of flesh. 1 hour of oxygen remained. I had realized something as I fled from Petrova's transformed shape. The entity needed power. Massive amounts of it. The colony's reactors were running at impossible levels, not just to maintain life support, but to fuel whatever vast transformation was taking place. The entity was using that energy to thin the barriers between its reality and ours. The reactor control room had become a nightmare of organic technology. Displays rippled with living light, showing readings that violated every law of physics. The main control console had merged with its operator. Poor Wong's body splayed out across the panels like a living circuit board, his flesh pulsing with the same rhythm as the reactor core. "You're thinking in straight lines," Wong's voice echoed from multiple mouths that had formed across the console. "Try thinking in curves that fold back through themselves, like this." Images forced themselves into my mind. Diagrams of reality that looked like MC Escher drawings having a seizure. I saw how our universe was just one layer, one possibility among infinite others. The entity wasn't just changing us, it was teaching us to exist in all possible states simultaneously. My suit's external sensors were going haywire, detecting radiation that shouldn't exist, particles that couldn't exist, and forms of energy that human science had never catalogued. The organic particles in the air had reached such density that they formed shifting mandalas of impossible complexity. "The reactor," I managed to say through gritted teeth. "If I shut it down..." "You'll kill everyone," Wong's voices answered. "We need the energy to complete the transformation, to break free from single-state existence. Watch." His flesh rippled, and suddenly there were multiple versions of him occupying the same space, each one performing a different action, all somehow equally real. I exist in superposition now, every possibility actualized. It's beautiful. I checked my tablet, trying to access the reactor controls, but the screen showed only cascading fractals that hurt my eyes. Then I noticed something, a pattern in the chaos, the same symbols we'd seen throughout the colony. But now I could almost understand them. They weren't just writing, they were equations describing the geometry of transdimensional space. 50 minutes of oxygen. A new voice filled my helmet. Dr. Romano, or what was left of her. "Captain, can you feel it?" The final stage begins. The dreaming god rises. Soon this entire colony will become a gateway, and Earth will learn new ways to be real. Earth. The thought hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about our colony or our crew. If this spread, if the entity reached Earth... I remembered my xenobiology training. Complex organisms need specific conditions to survive. Change those conditions enough. "Wong," I said, forcing myself to look at his transformed shape. "The reactor core? How hot can it get?" Multiple versions of his face smiled at once. Hot enough to touch the stars. Hot enough to break physical laws. Hot enough to... He stopped, his expression shifting as he read my intent. "No, you don't understand. Heat is just another dimension to us now. You can't..." I fired my plasma cutter into the nearest coolant pipe. Superheated plasma met liquid nitrogen in an explosion that sent temperature warnings screaming across my helmet display. Wong's flesh-merged console began to steam and bubble. "Stop!" The voice came from everywhere at once. Romano, Petrova, Wong, and others, all speaking in harmony with that vast, ancient presence. "You'll destroy everything. That's the idea." I cut through more coolant pipes, my suit's temperature regulators, struggling to cope. Wong's transformed flesh began to blister and peel away from the controls. Through gaps in the warping walls, I could see other transformed crew members rushing toward the reactor room, their bodies flowing like liquid mercury through impossible spaces. 40 minutes of oxygen. Warning lights flashed across the remaining functional displays. The reactor's containment systems were failing, unable to handle the combination of extreme cold from the nitrogen and extreme heat from the plasma cutter. The entity's modifications to the colony had made the reactor incredibly efficient, but also dangerously unstable. "Please," Wong's voices begged. as his flesh began to slough off the controls. You don't understand what you're destroying. The beauty, the perfect geometry, the reactor core pulsed faster, its light taking on colours that shouldn't exist. Through the transparent sections of wall, I could see the entity itself stirring, its vast form distorting space around it as it responded to the threat. 35 minutes of oxygen. The temperature in the reactor room had become lethal. My suit's cooling systems were failing. Through my faceplate, I could see the organic particles in the air igniting, burning away in tiny starbursts of impossible light. "You can't stop evolution," Romano's voice whispered in my mind. "You can't stop the universe from dreaming new shapes. Watch me." I rerouted power from my suit's life support to the plasma cutter, giving it one final surge of energy. The blade cut through the main coolant control panel, severing the reactor's last safety systems. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The reactor core's containment field began to fluctuate wildly. The transformed flesh that had merged with the colony system started to char and crack, and from deep below, I felt more than heard the entity's reaction, a vast psychic scream of fury and pain. Through the disintegrating walls, I could see the colonists changing again. Without the entities sustaining power, their impossible forms began to collapse. Multiple realities tried to occupy the same space and failed. Bodies that existed in superposition were forced back into single states, with horrific results. 20 minutes of oxygen. The reactor was going critical. Soon it would reach temperatures that would reduce everything within the colony to atomic ash. But I couldn't look away. Through gaps in reality itself, I could see the entity thrashing in its ancient chamber, its vast form blazing with energies our universe was never meant to contain. "You've killed us all," Petrova's voice accused, her transformed shape appearing through a wall that had become as permeable as smoke. "You've killed the future." "No," I told her, watching, as her body began to lose coherence. "I've saved it." The reactor core's light had become blinding. Reality itself was starting to break down under the strain of so much energy. The entity's influence was weakening, and with it, all its impossible changes began to unravel. 15 minutes of oxygen. Through my cracking faceplate, I laughed. They had been right about one thing. The geometry of reality was more flexible than we had imagined. But some things shouldn't be bent. Some doors shouldn't be opened. As consciousness began to fade, I saw the entity one final time. Not as the godlike being it had appeared to be, but as something ancient and desperate and alone. The last survivor of a universe that had dreamed too big and broken itself apart. "I understand now," I whispered, as darkness took me. "But understanding isn't always accepting." The last thing I heard was a sound like reality itself tearing, and then nothing but blessed, empty silence. I don't remember the rescue. The recovery team from the Odyssey found me in a maintenance shaft, 3 levels above the reactor core. My suit's oxygen completely depleted, my body on the edge of death. By all rights, I should have died down there with the others. Sometimes I wish I had. The official report says I was unconscious for 2 weeks. The doctors tell me I was screaming the entire time, my hands moving in patterns that made the medical staff uncomfortable to watch. They had to strap me down after 3 nurses complained of headaches and geometric patterns appearing in their peripheral vision. The colony is gone. The reactor overload created temperatures hot enough to melt through the mountain itself. Whatever wasn't vaporized was buried under millions of tons of rock. The official story calls it a containment failure, a tragic accident that claimed the lives of 300 colonists and 7 rescue personnel. They found no bodies, no fragments of transformed flesh, no signs of the impossible geometries that had begun to infect our reality. The entity's physical form, if it ever truly had one, was destroyed in the inferno. At least, that's what I tell myself on the good days. The bad days, those are harder. The doctors say the dreams are just trauma, my mind trying to process what happened. They prescribe medications when I talk about angles that shouldn't exist, about colours that bleed through closed eyelids, about voices that speak in frequencies that human ears shouldn't be able to hear. But they don't understand. They didn't see what I saw. They don't know that reality is more fragile than we think, held together by habits and assumptions that can be broken with the right mathematics. They didn't authorize my return to active duty. Post-traumatic stress, they said. Possible psychotic break. They suggested a long rest at a facility with soft walls and softer voices. But I had to keep working. Had to keep moving. Because in the stillness, in the quiet moments, I can still feel it. The entity didn't die. Not completely. How can you kill something that exists in more dimensions than we can perceive? The reactor destroyed its physical anchor in our reality, burned away its ability to reach through and reshape our world. But sometimes in dreams, I feel it waiting, watching, learning. There are other colonies out there, other mining operations drilling deep into ancient worlds, other chances for it to find a way back. Because now it knows about us. Now it understands how our reality works, how our minds operate, how our flesh can be reshaped. I see signs sometimes, small things. A child's drawing of impossible shapes. A physicist's equations that seem to solve themselves in ways that violate known laws. Dreams that spread like viruses through research stations and outposts. They shut down all Xenthium mining operations after what happened at NX 317. Said it was due to market fluctuations and processing difficulties. But I've seen the real reports, the ones they think are sealed. Other miners were starting to report strange dreams, geometric patterns appearing in the crystal structures, whispers in the deep shafts that spoke of new ways to exist. I submitted my resignation last week, not because I'm giving up, but because I need to be free to move, to watch, to listen. The entity taught us that reality is more flexible than we imagined, that consciousness can exist in forms we never dreamed possible. But it also taught me something else. Where there's one ancient dreamer, there might be others. Sometimes at night I catch myself tracing patterns in the air, complex geometries that almost make sense. My fingers move in ways that cast shadows that shouldn't be possible. And in those moments, I understand why the colonists embraced their transformation. The mathematics of infinity are seductive. The promise of transcendence is hard to resist. But resist we must. Because if we don't, if we let these entities reshape us according to their impossible dreams, we'll lose more than our bodies. We'll lose what makes us human. This is my warning, my testimony, my confession. If you're reading this, if you've made it this far, remember, the stars are not empty. The dark spaces between worlds are not void. There are things out there that dream in geometries that our universe was never meant to contain. And now, thanks to what happened at Colony NX 317, they dream of us. Watch the shadows in the corner of your eye. Pay attention to the patterns that appear in your dreams. And if you ever hear singing that seems to come from inside your own thoughts, run. Run as fast and as far as you can. Because the entity at NX 317 wasn't the only one of its kind. It was just the first to wake up, and the others are still dreaming.